Hello and welcome everyone to We Have Data. Now what? Thanks for joining me. I'm Kylie Donia. I'm with the K-12 education team here at Esri. I've been on this team for a couple years now, but I've been at Esri for quite a bit longer. And previous to this team, I worked on our data collection apps. So to me, it's always fun to explore this intersection of data collection and education, which are two of my passions, and see how they can come together and what children get out of it. And in this case, we're also going to be looking at a bit of storytelling in that intersection. So it should be a lot of fun. And first, just a little bit, the power of data collection, right? So data is all around us. We're constantly using it, evaluating it. And through data collection, children start to understand how to structure data and think critically about all that data that they are seeing. They can build their own data. They get to be scientists, right? They're making information that no one else has. As part of that, they're going to learn some of the weaknesses in data, some of its strengths, some of the questions to ask when using other people's data. And they're going to ultimately become better. They'll ultimately become better data consumers and evaluators. Sorry. Let's see if we're get that. There we go. Okay. So in addition to getting to become better data scientists, right? Consumers, evaluators, kids also just get excited when they're looking at their own data on a map. So no one else knows this information. And so they can take this data and they've collected it and they've learned something, right? But what do they do now? Like they have dots on a map maybe, or they have information and they need to go from that to maybe communicating that information, maybe getting more out of it than the dots on the map. So collecting and having the data isn't enough. Students need to take that data and solve a problem or tell a story, and they're going to give meaning, turn it into knowledge, apply what they've learned, all these great concepts for education, right? Now, the first thing that we're going to do after we've collected data, well, there's really two parts, okay? Analysis or understanding what your data has to say, and then also communicating about that data. Now, if you're new to data collection, I'm not really going to be talking about how you collect data, how you design your data collection and design your structures. I covered that in the last hour. And so if you missed it, please go back to that. Sorry. This session's jumping in after just a second. Sorry about that. So if you're new to data collection, keep that in mind that we're not going to get into some of those basics. And we're going to look at this data after we have collected it. All right, so analysis. There's a couple types of analysis that we can be doing. One is visual analysis. Give me just a second. I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So visual analysis is one part of this, and the focus is just on understanding what your data has to say, okay? So we can use visual analysis, looking at the maps, looking at the data we've collected, or we can go and use specialized analysis tools. So let's start just by looking at some visual analysis. All right, so those of you who did join me in the last session, you've seen this map. We're looking at favorite colors. This was a very simple data collection project where people were asked, what's your favorite color and roughly where are you? And you can see we've got some data on a map. But let's see what we can learn. Well, you can see where most of the respondents were, right? A lot of people in the United States, some in Europe as well. And that makes sense with the people I know since I made this data collection project and I shared it out a bit organically, just through word of mouth. Is it evenly distributed? Well, no, it's very much clustered in different areas. All right, so we're doing some analysis here. We're starting to find a pattern, making some of these connections. We could go look closer into an area and see what other patterns we could learn, right? We have an interactive map here. What if I was to ask you, what's the most popular color? What about the least popular color? Just a second, I'm sorry. Sorry about that. So we can look at this and we could ask things, right? Like most popular color, least popular color. That's harder to answer, right? Because our eye isn't going to be good at that when looking at the data on a map. Can we tell what the distribution is in different map areas? How does it compare in different areas? So a map is useful, but is not the only thing that we can use to learn about this data. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the other tools as well. All right, so in ArcGIS Online, you can also use a number of tools to do some of this analysis for you. Things like creating buffers. What is within a mile? It'll give you information about that. What about hotspots, identifying clusters, where things are centralized? How many of something is in a given area? These are all questions that you can ask a computer and get a great answer based on the map. So let's go ahead and take a look at one of these now. We're going to look at interpolating points. So let me pull that up. All right. So before we can do analysis, we kind of have to know what we're looking at. And right now, I'm pretty sure you guys can't really tell yet. But what we have is some points here. And we can go ahead and we can look at the table, which we wouldn't need to do if it's your own data, right? Because you'd be familiar with it. And I'll tell you about this data too. So what we're looking at is a soundscape. So each of these are recordings of somebody about the loudness in decibels in their neighborhood around them, their description of the sound. They were measuring it on their phone. So we can see how loud it was. Here was cars, horns, people. All right. So we're looking at sound. I can tell that this area is probably a bit louder. Over here is got a little quieter in here, and maybe we'd want to see that on a different base map, right? So we can do these kinds of things to explore our data. We can get a sense of, oh, okay, so this looks like a more commercial area, and here's some houses. So this pattern might make sense. But what if we wanted to know what the sound is like in some other areas? And that's where this tool is going to help us, because when we're doing data collection, we can only collect it at so many points. So we're analyzing the pattern today, and we're going to be interpolating the points. We want to take that soundscape, and you'll understand this stakeholder part a little bit later. We'll get to that. And we're going to choose a field, and here we're curious about how loud it is. And we're going to give it a name. And let's see what else we want to do. Well, we'll use our current map extent because we know this is the only area where we were looking at points. And let's go ahead and check our credit usage as well. So credits are kind of like the currency of ArcGIS Online, and you get plenty with your K-12 school bundle, but it's always a good idea to check what your usage would be before running an analysis tool, because it can sometimes catch you before you do something you didn't mean to do. Perhaps you'd been at the wrong extent or using a layer with more features than you intended to use. When I look and I see I'm using less than a credit, I go, okay, yeah, that makes sense for the amount of data I'm expecting to be analyzing. So I can go ahead and run that. And what's happening is the computer is now generating a model of predicting what the sound is at points where I wasn't able to measure it. Now, of course, there are going to be limitations to this, right? This is not a huge data set. I'm not expecting to get a perfect model as a result, or a perfect prediction as a result of that. I would have to collect a lot more data to improve these predictions, but at least we can get a sense. And this is like a cooking show. I've gone ahead and done it ahead of time, so I'm just going to turn that on. And you can get a sense of where it is. So from the colors, the darker areas, turn off the double now that it came in for us, the darker areas are louder. And here's kind of the trend. And that makes sense with the base map we were looking at, right? So we've done a little bit of visual analysis to go with our analysis tool. All right, so that's the first part, right? We've taken our data, we've understood it, we've made some conclusions about it maybe, we've looked for some patterns, both visually and with some tools, and that can take much longer, right? There are quite a number of tools. I listed only a few on that slide, and it takes, well, some playing with it. One of my favorite GIS things, play with it, go experiment, explore, and see what you need to use, because in your project, the tool you need will be different than the tool I need for my project. But now we're ready to communicate it. Okay, let's share what we've learned. Now, it's your data. So when I showed that last example, right, we had to start by opening the table because I had to bring you in enough so that you'd know what I was looking at and talking about. but I knew the story it was telling. I knew what tool I wanted to use. So I can't tell you exactly which tool for your project, but there's a bunch that Esri offers. So let's look at some of these. What if you want others to be able to do the same analysis you did? Maybe do those same steps and get a sense of the same thing. Well, I might want to just share a map and maybe some steps for them with how to do it. Maybe I want to take it a step further and not just provide my data to them, but provide a dashboard where it's going to take that map and that data I collected and pull in the visualizations like charts and lists that I think are going to help them understand this data because I'm the data expert. It's my data, right? Maybe I want to put a narrative to it, right? I want to take them through a story or a journey. Now, I can create a story map to do that, right? So that's going to allow me to combine a bunch of tools. Now, there's others on here I haven't spoken to, right? There's Web App Builder and Hub and all these different ways to take data and give it a bigger story and share it out. And you'll find sessions on some of these other tools throughout this conference. But I'm going to dive in and first look at the simplest. Let's make a map. So we'll come back in, and this time it looks a little bit different. I am using the new map viewer now, and that's okay. Don't worry, they're similar, and there are sessions later in the conference if you want to come check out more about this. But what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add a layer. I'm going to go to my favorite color layer. And here, I'm not seeing what I expect, and that's okay. Give me just a second. I am going to go ahead and open a new tab and try to remember why that's not working. It's okay. We're going to make it fun. I'll just change out what I was going to show you. Let's go to a different layer because I definitely want to use one from Survey 123. And I'm not sure which account I made that one in. And sometimes I have too many and get myself tricked up. I also know I made one about shoes the other day. So we'll use shoes instead of colors. Now, this is again points on a map with information about people's shoe size and their style of shoe. And looking at, what is the distribution of shoes? Did weather and temperature play into that, right? And so we have 3 different layers, and these are all created by Survey 123. This first one down here is just called shoes. That's the true feature layer itself, okay? That has all of the information and is the one I don't really want to share with people. That's the one I'm going to keep to myself. Now, the field worker one is the one that's used to fill out the survey. So it's editable. Something to keep in mind there, if a layer is editable, people might edit things you don't want edited. Other people might add stuff, right? Your sharing is going to control that, but I don't really want to share it with everyone so they can read it because it is editable. So that's where the stakeholder one comes in. And that's based on who you want to see results. Let me jump into Survey 123 for a minute, because I want to show you how these different layers, how the settings on them and the permissions are set up. So here's that shoe survey, so we can use that same one. Now, when you come in and you're looking at your survey, you have a collaborate tab. Now, we've talked before, if you were in the last hour or if you've done a survey before, about the sharing the survey, right? This is who can fill it out and what they can do. That is what's going to set up the permissions on that field worker layer. Think about it, the person in the field, they're doing the data collection, right? So they need to be able to submit data to the survey. Now, your stakeholder is the person who cares about your results, right? Same as at school, you have stakeholders on projects, things like that. That's controlled here in the sharing results. So you could also have it available to everyone, but you could change it. You could say people can only see their own records. Maybe people can view it, but not export it. So you, again, are in control of who can see it. And you can take those results and you can actually view them right in the survey app, which is something we looked at a little bit in the other hour. And you can see some of the information in here. But let's go ahead back to where we were. Let's jump back to our map. So in this case, we're making a map to share. Because we're making that map to share, what layer are we going to include? the stakeholder. We're sharing results. Sorry, I should have been more explicit there. So since we're sharing the results, we're going to add the stakeholder layer. I apologize for my internet connection today. It's working very hard. I'm going to go ahead and reload because I'm noticing the base map and things didn't come in there either. Let's see if it's happier this time. That looks much better. And we can do our quick search for shoes. And there's our stakeholder layer and we're up and running. So let's go ahead and add our shoes layer to the map. This is the basics of where you'll start on sharing your data, right? You can share an interactive map. Now, this does leave it in the hands of your reader to explore that and understand it, but there are some things you can do to help them. So let's look at those. One thing we can do is set up what it looks like. In this case, we can add a field that we want to symbolize our data based on. Perhaps in this time, let's look at the style of shoe. For example, things like, are they wearing socks? Is it athletic shoes, slippers, boots? And you can go ahead and you can make it look the way you want. I find the symbols a little bit small by default, so I'm going to come in and make them larger. And again, this is something you'll see in a map viewer session. So the buttons on which you do it are a little less important to me right now than the fact that you can do it, okay? And you're symbolizing it. Great, that's a good start. Now it is an interactive map and I don't have a lot of surrounds of text and information. So people are going to be clicking on the map to learn about my data. And I have a little table, but maybe I want to make that experience better. Another thing you can do to make it better is configure the pop-ups on it. And that's one of the reasons I'm actually using New Map Viewer is the pop-up experience can create much nicer pop-ups. For example, we can add the attachments right in. We could make a different kind of text section if we didn't want that table look. Perhaps we could say, let's say, pick our fields that we want to say. We could say what brand of shoes are, and then let's put in the style and what size they have on. We can say, okay, and you'll see that that comes up at the bottom now. Now in the pop-up, I can do things like change the order, put that at the top instead. Maybe I don't need that list of fields at all, so I'll delete it. And you can make your own pop-up. Now you'll notice I did set up an attachment, but I'm not seeing it on that one because there's no attachment with that point of data. Here's someone who had socks on. So now you can get a sense of what it looks like. Maybe I don't want the picture so big. I can change it. Great. We can make the map and we can share this map. Now I'm not going to go through all the settings here, but just like any map you're making in ArcGIS Online, you give it a title, you give it some tags, a description, and then you'll be able to share it through your organization, to groups, or publicly as needed for the project that you're working on. Now, one of the things about making a map for data collection is a lot of these other things I'm going to show, story maps, dashboard, they're going to start from this point, right? They start with that map. So let's keep going. We looked at the map, and now we want to do something that's a little bit more. We want to help the user understand what we've found. So we're going to go ahead and jump to a dashboard. This is the dashboard that I put together for the favorite colors, and you can see it brings in a little bit more, as we discussed before, right? Now, if I was asking you something like, what's the most popular color? Would you better be able to answer my question? Yeah, right. We can look at a table right here and see very clearly that blue is the most popular. Green is lower. Okay. Well, it's interactive. What else can I learn? Well, I happen to know my son's favorite fact is that if you look at Europe, blue and green become almost even. And in fact, for a while over the summer, they were even. And he found that fascinating because it was a difference, right? A different pattern in a different place. And the nice thing about a dashboard is it lets your reader explore this data on their own. You're guiding them because you've provided the list, the types of charts you think they'll be interested in, and you're helping them find it. You can give interactions so they can see different aspects, showing only the blue or only the green, or maybe both of them. But your reader has the ability to explore and dig into this data in the ways that they find interesting. So while you're packaging it, You're still giving some room, but you did have to package it. So let's look at what that's like. What if we were editing and making one of these? What is that all about? So here's our same dashboard. And it looks like, again, my internet has caught us. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh the page. Sometimes when I've had a number of tabs open, they get a little bit tired. All right, and now I'm looking at the same dashboard, but it's editable. So I can do things like add another element. And you can see there's quite a lot of choices in a dashboard. We could add multiple maps. We can bring in legends. We could bring in more charts of different types. Indicators are what these are over here, showing different statistics about our data. A gauge is another way we could be showing some data. Perhaps we want to add a gauge because we would like to get 1,000 people to fill out our survey. Well, we can see how close we are to making that goal. We can change what it looks like, give it different looks and feels. Perhaps we want it to be a percentage. Okay, so with great power comes great responsibility, right? You are now able to configure the things that you think someone needs to see about your data and place them. And you need to do your best of understanding what they're going to need when they are looking at your data. And we can place that in. Let's look at some other things we can configure in here. Lists are very popular. They're a great way to show your data. And you can do something very simple like this, where what you're doing is simply pulling in some attributes. Now, you can take it a lot farther. You have full ability with Arcade in here to do all kinds of processing. You can do very interesting things like changing the background colors based on other attributes, or making the format be much more dynamic, or as you may have seen in the plenary dashboard this morning, having an icon that showed the temperature people chose instead of the word about the temperature, right? All of that's possible because of this formatting that was done in the dashboard. It was just rendering the data in different ways. And that's what a dashboard is. It's you choosing how to show off your data. And again, we can also add charts. So let's go ahead and look at that. Actually, I did not show. Let me get back in that list for a minute. The other thing we can do here in this list is we can add some actions. So we can say this list knows about the map it's near. And what I want to do is when selection changes, okay, so when something in my list has the selection change, we're going to flash it on the map. Let's see that. We can jump in here and let's select something in our list. Now, this is useful because we could use that to find where that is. And in this case, our list is sorted so that the newer ones are at the top. And we can see where's someone who likes green. Okay, see that flashing? So I have a list and I have a map, but they know about each other. Just like you saw with the chart down here when I would click on bars, there's a relationship between these. And that's part of your authoring, right? You get to design the interactions that should happen between the elements that you place in your dashboard. And again, what you're doing here is you're setting it up to guide other people's exploration. You are the expert of this data and you're sharing it so that they can learn from it. They need to be guided. You took a lot of time and you're presenting it. All right, let's go on for the next one. So from a dashboard, maybe we want to give a bit more narrative to it, right? I'm sure many of you have seen story maps. Let's jump in and look at one. Here's all the different story maps I have. My apologies, it was not open yet. I'm just going to type the short URL for the same favorite color one. Oh, that's right. It was way over there. No worries. So we've got our story map up. And you can see that in this story map, I have presented my survey. And you can fill it out. And there's the map. And you can see the maps appear. And then all the different types of analysis you might want to do. So in a story map, you can actually take and place anything you want. And in this case, you can see I've even embedded the dashboard. I think of the story map as almost the research paper, right? So I am now presenting my findings. I'm building the complete story of my project. What maps were interesting? What images helped me along the way? Maybe some of the nice attachments or things that help me come to my conclusions. Maybe there's other sources I've been using along the way, and I want to bring them in here to tell a full, complete picture. This is a lot more guided. I'm providing a lot more narrative that's helping people understand my data. I'm not just relying on them to click around the dashboard and explore it on their own with my guidance, but on their own. I'm giving more and more structure to it. So I think you'll see that kind of the order I presented these in, making a map, making a dashboard, making a story map, you're giving more and more context to that work you've done. And that may or may not be appropriate for your project, right? Like I said earlier, I can't tell you which one is right for you, but I can tell you what each one is right for generally. So for our story maps, we want to remember that we're creating engaging projects, but they're geographic and they're interactive maps. So make sure you don't lose that map and that ability for the reader to dive a little deeper and see the things you were seeing. What you really want to be doing here is inviting the reader to explore your data and your project. Well, and maybe you even want to take them on your same journey of discovery, right? Especially with students, that can be very powerful to see how someone else went from collecting data to analyzing that data and understanding it and building this conclusion and understanding the questions they were asking themselves along the way. All right, so one of the trickiest things in data collection is it's very hard to say, you need this tool, you need this resource. So instead, what I want to do is present you with a number of resources that will help you get to the tools that are right for your project. So for the analysis, the ArcGIS Online documentation has a great look at the different tools that are available and when you might use them and the types of questions that they answer. Dashboard has some good resources I've included here. Story maps do. If you'd like to play with that soundscape project that I was showing, it's on the Geo Projects Hub and you can go there and check it out. Now, one of the great things about data collection is you do a cool project, right? You've collected data, you've learned something no one else knows, you've wrapped it up in a bundle, you've understood it, first of all, right? And then you wrap it up and package it and you're ready to share it. For those of you in K-12, the good news is there is an ArcGIS Online school competition for US schools where you can present those and compete at local, state, and then a national level. There were winners of that recently. It runs every spring, and story maps are always the best. They show that whole student journey of learning to do data collection, analyzing it, and putting it all together. And the last few years, the projects that win have all incorporated some type of data collection. Now, it wasn't always field data collection, which happens to be my favorite, right? But they were generating data, and this same process applies with data you've generated in other ways. So that's one thing for you to consider once you've done some projects and you're interested in taking it to the next level or challenging yourself, or if you just want to explore some things that other students are doing, you can head over to that site and there's a number of examples there that you'll be able to check out. All right, I like to leave this slide up for a bit. I can also go ahead and put these into the chat. And I want to go ahead and see if there are any questions as we were going.
Hi, Carly. Yeah, one of the questions was, can you put this in the chat, please? So
wonderful. That one I can handle.
We did have one question from, earlier on from looking at your interpolation.
Okay.
And so in a hydrological survey, if we collect the water quality data for different wells, will it draw the contour lines for different water quality?
You know, some of the analysis tools are not my area of expertise. Jason, do you know on that one? You want to jump in here?
Yep. Okay.
Awesome.
So possibly. It would depend on the spatial distribution of your well data, how many points you've got, that type of thing. And just be careful about the reliability of that sort of interpolation between different points, inferring similarity, or I don't know your data set, so you'll have to look at your data and the sort of the landscape where you're collecting data as well. But yes, potentially yes, it could actually do that interpolation for you online. It would just depend on how much data you've got.
Awesome, thank you.
You could also maybe use the create watershed tool, which is in the same analysis pack, and so you could actually bound your analysis by the watershed as well. So that could work.
Yeah, Jason, that's a great point. A lot of these analysis tools become even more powerful when you pair a few together, right? Yep. Building a model that takes different geographic aspects into account and building up to your solution.
Yeah, and just building on that hydrological point. So if you did have some well data with some adverse readings, then you can actually use the trace down stream tool to see where that water may end up as well. So you can look further downstream, so you can start to look at things like the impacts of that.
Great.
Okay, so another question we've got here: could you work time into a soundscape project?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So with your data set, once you've generated it, you will be able to use all the capabilities in ArcGIS Online, and you can create time-dependent data sets. So you would be able to take that variable and look at that on a map.
Yep. Okay.
And Joseph has a great, he wants to,
Yeah.
he's sharing as well that he has on learn.arcgis.com a real-time weather lesson, and it does do some interpolation of a weather surface with real-time weather data. So if that's something you're interested in, that's a great lesson to go check out.
Yep.
Awesome. I love the sharing of resources in the chat. Thank you guys. Those are great.
Most of the questions were answered in the chat as well. So
Okay, wonderful.
I don't think I missed anything. If your question has not been answered, now's the time to speak up or chat up. Yeah.
So, Kylie, one of the questions that maybe people would like to have some clarification around is sharing. So you talked about creating maps, and what is a good way to share some of those with people who are not members of your organization, or they don't have an Esri account.
Great. Let me jump back out to our map. So in ArcGIS Online, the basis of sharing is the same for any type of content. Okay, so whether you're looking at a map, a layer, a data collection project like your survey, right? The same fundamentals of sharing apply. You can choose to share it publicly, and then anyone who goes to that link can see it. You can choose to share it with just your organization, which would mean people need to be signed in and part of your same organization. You can share with groups, so people need to be signed in, but maybe they're not in your org, or maybe they're even a subset of your org. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when you're sharing something like a story map that you've put a dashboard in that uses a map, that uses a layer. But the good news is the tools are going to help you share all of that correctly. So as you go, when you're in story maps, and when you were editing it and you change some of the settings on the sharing, it'll prompt you for the things that you are able to change the sharing on as well that need to be updated to match your story and let you know you're about to do that. So there are a lot of helps along the way for that. One of the other things that I do strongly recommend, anytime you've shared something, copy that URL yourself, use an incognito or what's the Firefox word for it? I never remember, but basically the browser where it doesn't know who you are, and make sure that link still works. Just realized one of the things I meant to show I missed in my demo. So since we have a few minutes, I'll go ahead and show one more thing. I just wanted to give you guys a look at what editing a story actually looks like for those of you who haven't done it before. My apologies for missing that. So when you come into a story map and you're editing, it has a very nice user interface for adding text. Of course, there we go. There's my internet catching up. All right, so it has a great interface for editing the text and changing the settings. And once you're down in the story, you'll see a little plus appearing as you move your cursor, right? So that little plus is where you can add things. It's pretty much constantly throughout. You go to the spot where you want to add, and you get a whole bunch of different things that you can choose. You could add more text, you can add buttons, you can add separators, you can add maps, images, image galleries, video, audio, which is amazing, and embed, which pretty much means you can put any app that you've built right on in here. Swipes to look at different maps, timelines, which are now in beta, which is another way to look at some of the data over time, right? And then slideshows, and sidecars, which are just different visual representations of ways that the page will scroll. A slideshow goes scrolling side to side horizontally, and the sidecar is vertically. So what you can do is you simply choose the one that you're interested in doing. and that part gets added. Now you can go ahead and add that image. For example, I have an image over on my other screen. Well, I did. Let me click back to it quickly. Just browsing to grab an image so that you can see what that looks like. There it is. Here's one. And you can just drag it and drop it right on in. It's going to go ahead and upload it. It gets some information. If you want it to link to a website or things like that, you can do that here. And then you can go ahead and add your image. When you add it, it'll appear right where you've placed it. And you'll see you now have some different options you can do. You can choose to have the image be small, in which case it sometimes moves to find a spot next to text. Let's see where it ended up. So that was a bad choice today. Oh, here we go. It's a little bit hard to see with the refresh there. So it's made it small on this side. You can choose to put it to the right as well. You can also make it bigger, right? It's up to you. So what I wanted to emphasize here is just that in the story map, one of the great things is you're not having to write any code to do these things. It is a click and configure type of experience, but you do actually have a lot of choices you can make to make it look like your own. You're also able to do things. Here's where you can share it, actually, since we were asking about the sharing. Here's where you pick those choices, and then it'll help you if you need to set other sharing as well. And then in the design tab, you can choose, do you want navigation? You can get the sections as headers or not. Did you want a different theme? Do we want to make the whole page look different? These are up to you, and you can actually create your own as well. So you can take your own brand and your own page and really make the story map look like your own in quite an easy, just a click and configure experience.
So Kylie, we have some other questions come through.
Perfect. Go for it.
So is offline data collection possible in Survey 123?
Great. So that's a great question. So Survey 123, you actually have a couple options. So you can use Survey 123 when you're collecting data. You can use a web browser or you can use an app. Now, if you're using the web browser and you're offline, you're going to have to be really careful, right? Because you're using a browser. The whole idea of a browser is it's a connected interface. So you could put some data in, not close your browser and go hit submit once you're back in the classroom. But there's a little bit of risk there. If you're using the Survey 123 Field app, there is an offline experience. Now, just right out of the box, it's very easy to get it to where you can collect that data. It's a little trickier to set it up so that while you're collecting, you can see a map, like a base map of where you are at as well. But if your project needs that, you can configure that. And I don't remember if that link was in the list I've already posted in the chat, but we have a story that teaches how to do that I can share.
So another question. So are we finding the use of mobile phones to collect GPS data working well? I'd say probably we are.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's going to depend on your project, right? So what do you mean by working well? Are you collecting where's the track at my school and where are the classrooms? You're going to be fine because the limitation when you're talking about a mobile phone is that the GPS chip in it is not going to be the same as a GPS chip that's like on the little antennas you see people carry around, right? So a phone is generally like at the best more like 5-8 kind of feet, that kind of range, whereas those others can get even down to the centimeter. So if what you're trying to map is on a very small scale and things are close together, the cell phone's probably not going to cut it. But if what you're mapping is a little bit broader, or if you're not worried about that exact position, you'll be just fine on a phone.
Another question related to the story maps. I think one of the little functions you saw, which is the new timeline block in story maps. So someone asking, is it similar to Google's historic imagery timeline? And it's, I think, is it similar to Google's historical timeline imagery? I think it's a different thing though. So I think the thing in the story map, the timeline is just so you can string events together. So 1960 this happened, 1965 that happened. If you want to look at historical imagery, there's another app called Wayback. So if you just Google Esri Wayback imagery, that will give you older imagery as well. And there's also the Sentinel-2 app, or if you search for Landsat and Esri, you'll find whole imagery there as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Does the school package include Tracker?
So does the school package include Tracker? I'm not going to give you a 100% sure answer on that one. I know it is something that is in progress. I'm not sure the state that it's in because the licensing on Tracker itself is changing. So Tracker is being included with the bundle of field apps that includes field maps, survey 123, quick capture, all of those. So it's just a matter of when that transition happens in terms of also getting that into school licenses. So it is something we're aware of. If that's something you're looking for your school, please send an email to schools@esri.com and we'll be able to get you the current information on how to do that or when.
Tommy's saying nope. So is that to that question?
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a question there. If Tracker's not included, how could you record your location continuously?
Okay, so what you could do in survey 123, you could have a line streaming, right? Or not streaming, but you could be collecting a line at the same time. Quick capture is actually a better example. So with quick capture, you could start a line recording and it would just track you as you're walking and collect that. And then you'd still be able to drop points along the way. That is one of the use cases for it. The difference between Tracker and that is that Tracker is a different type of service behind the scenes that's much more optimized for performance and battery use. So you'll be getting a little harder hit on those things, but you would be able to see where people had been while collecting.
And do we have a worksheet on actually structuring a spreadsheet of data? You know, if we want to go and collect or make a CSV file of data, do we have any resources on that?
Yeah, so we did a lot more about setting up that data and that data collection in the previous hour. And so that will be recorded and available. So if you're curious about that process of just setting up your data collection, I recommend watching that one later.
So I was going to answer directly to Carly's question. Now, Carly, so if you use survey 123, it automatically collects the data and maps it for you. So you don't have to sort of upload the data or put it into a spreadsheet. It's already automatically done for you.
Yep. Yeah, Carly. So it's a drag and drop experience. What you can picture is Google Forms with a map, right? So you don't need to do that spreadsheet yourself.
Again, unless I've missed a question, is it possible to represent data in a 3D?
All right, so that's going to depend on how you've set up your data. You can set up your data to be Z-aware, right? Which means having that elevation attribute on it. And field maps does collect and honor that, but you've got to set it up right.
Or if you did have you could even take a spreadsheet of data if you map that, or if you didn't need to turn it into a feature service, or if you just had some data in survey 123 that had, say, for instance, it was number of shoes that you have, coming back to your example, Kylie, you could actually take that into scene and you could actually use that attribute to extrude the point up to a certain height as well. So you could use extrusion inside the 3D scene viewer as well with your attributes.
Right. So for example, if you wanted people with bigger feet to have higher points and show kind of the size of the shoe in relation as well, you can do that.
Yeah. Can you make a copy? Can you copy a story map with the same maps, images, etc., included in the copy?
So copying story maps gets a little bit tricky because if I was to ask you what you want to have happen when I copy your story map and I asked 5 people, I'd probably get 5 different answers. So it's one of the things that Esri is working on right now is a better way to be copying story maps. But some people want a copy of everything in the story, their own layer, their own map, and their ownership of the story. Other people are looking to edit the story around the same map or layer. Perhaps it's a living atlas layer or map, right? And so we're working on it, but it's not quite there to where you can easily do that.
The function's there to duplicate a story map. Again, that's different to copying. It's just
right. Yep. So you can duplicate, but then you are getting, I'm not sure with the question if you mean, do you want the same maps or did you want copies of the maps?
Yeah. Duplicate is like a save as for story maps.
Yep. Yeah. A save as. So those maps and layers stay unchanged and it's in your same account.
Yeah.
All right, well, we are right at the hour. I appreciate everyone who joined us for this part. If you missed the first part but are curious about data collection, they will be posted in the recordings later. This one will also be posted if you missed something and want to hear it again. Or if you have follow-up questions, please go ahead and email us at schools@esri.com. And thank you all for coming.